Hi, Mikasa neighbors. This is the second video. The first one was focused on reading a utility bill. This one, we're going to take a look more at our overall utility bills, stretching from January of 2022 through June of 2023. And then in the third video, I'll get really detailed about each of those. Again, just a few reminders about the utility data. I'm not an economist, accountant, or specialist in any of this. I'm just compiling data on spreadsheets and trying to make them understandable. I'm also not making any recommendations. I'm just showing known data. The rates for all of our utilities are available at saukcity.net/utilities. They're also in your monthly utility bill. This data is just for utilities used by our common areas, so that's electric and water. There's no sewer or gas involved. It doesn't include your units, electric, water, sewer, and natural gas. You'll pay for those separately. 2022's data is complete, and 2023's data is through June. The first video I did was on a utility bill and what it says. Second one is total costs since 2022. That's the one we're going to do right now. And then there'll be another video breakdown costs for each area so you can get really detailed into each of those. My goal here was to try to make this either really general for people or really specific and anticipating some questions. So some of you might go through all of it. Some of you might just look at parts of it, and that's fine. And then I will also make available the Google Sheets, the spreadsheets that has all the data if you want to take a look at it that way. So for this one, we're just going to look at the general utility bills and what the breakdown and costs were. So before we do that, though, I do need to mention a couple things about electrical costs. Water is fairly simple to compare year to year. Electrical is not going to be the same. And that's because electricity is more variable. It's not an apples to apples comparison year to year. And as we get into this more, you'll see how electric becomes very, very variable, where water is completely variable based on our usage, but we can predict that. That one's much easier to do. So let me show you an example of what I mean. In this, we're going to take a look at the first 6 months of 2022 and the first 6 months of 2023. And this, we're going to talk in terms of kilowatt hours. That's the electricity that we use. The average kilowatt hours per month, the PCAC rates for the first 6 months. This is an adjustable cost that changes. This is all based on the village and how much it costs them for electricity based on how much the whole village uses. So if the village uses more than what was budgeted, then we get charged that. If the village uses less than what was budgeted, then we actually get a discount. But that hasn't been the case for quite a long time with high energy costs. And then I'll show you what that PCAC cost is. Not the total electrical bill, but just the PCAC part of our bill. And you're going to, again, see how this is quite variable. So in the first 6 months of 2022, we used 36,020 kilowatt hours of electricity. On average, that's about 6,000 kilowatt hours. In 2023, we actually used less. We used just under 30,000 kilowatt hours. That comes out to just under 5,000 kilowatt hours per month. So we actually used less electricity this year in the first 6 months than we did in 2022. So one would assume that the bill should be less since we use less. On average, now this is just the PCAC part of our bill. If you want to know more of what that is, take a look back at the first video on how to read the bill. But on average, the PCAC part of our bill was $109.86. In 2023, even though we used less electricity, it actually is costing us more, $150.30. And that's because the average PCAC rate for 6 months of 2022 was just under 2 cents. Now, I know 2 cents doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you're doing it thousands and thousands of times, it does add up. Whereas the PCAC rate this year, the first 6 months on average, was just over 30 cents. So just over 3 cents. Sorry. And again, I know it doesn't seem like much. It's just over a penny. But when you're taking that penny and you're doing that thousands and thousands of times, it adds up. So in other words, we've used less electricity this year so far, but it's cost more due to that elevated power cost adjustment clause. That's what PCAC stands for. Had that PCAC remained unchanged from 2022 when we were still following this average rate, this was not the total rate, this is just on average, our PCAC costs, instead of being $150.30, would have been $89.30. So that PCAC number changes all the time, and it's been relatively high recently as compared to past years. So keep that in mind as we're looking at cost breakdowns, and it's not an apples to apples comparison when it comes to electricity. And I'll try to show some other examples as we get into more data later. So if we look at our overall utility costs by percent and then total bills in 2022, about 3/4 of our costs were from building electric. About 19% was from our building water usage. And then about 7.1% was the pond electric. In 2023, you're going to notice it looks very, very similar. Still almost 3/4 of our utility bill is building electric. Building water, we've actually used a little bit more so far this year on average, just this far, 23.7%. As we get into the winter months, that will obviously drop. Pond electric is also a little bit lower at this point. If you'd like to see some dollar amounts associated with that, that was our total cost for 2022 for pond electric, building water, building electric, and then if you add them all up, we spent about $10,660.82 just on the costs, so not including tax and not including natural gas. 2023 thus far, here's what we've spent, just so you can see the numbers. And you'll see halfway through the year, we've actually spent over half of what we spent last year. Moving on, we can break these down by month. Or sorry, by utility here, and then the next ones we'll do by month. So in 2022 total, we spent about $2,000 on just building water. This year so far through June, we've spent over half of that so far. Now, again, keep in mind, we're not going to be probably watering in October, November, and December. So there's really only a few more months to go, but just so you can see that comparison. Building electric, and this one will go really more through December, but in 2022, we spent almost $8,000 in electric. This year so far, we've spent just over $4,000. And in 2022 for pond electric, I think this was around just over $700 total. But we've spent less than half of that so far in 2023. So to break these down by month, and just so you know how to read this, the first number down on the bottom here, that's the year, so 2022. And then the 01 just means January, 02 is February, so on and so forth. The bottom numbers here, the bottom colors, the blue, that is the cost for building water. And you'll notice that there's always some blue in there because we always have some fixed costs in there. The red one then, that's our building electric, which we have that every month as well. And again, there are some fixed cost in there, but lots of variability. And then the yellow one is the pond electric. And if you look really closely, there's always a little bit of it in there, just not quite as much in some of the colder months. Warmer months are definitely where we see it more. Now, if we add in the first 6 months of this year, you can start to see the big picture thus far of what we've done. And then if you really want to break it down and just look at a 6-month to 6-month comparison, just to blow those up in 2022, this is what it would have looked like, each of the breakdowns, and then here's 2023. And you should see very similar shapes overall. January was our highest, then it goes down for a couple months. We've flip-flopped April and May, and then June goes up a little bit. So that's just the general big picture of how those go. In the next video, I'll actually break each of those down so you can see what all the different pieces are of each bill and where they're coming from. But for now, I'd ask, what questions do you have? Are there other wonders that you have? Is there other data you want to see, other ways you want to see it? Or you just have questions in general about some of our utility costs?